insertion!
Born on February 15, 1820 in Adams, Mass., Susan B. Anthony was a prominent civil rights leader during the women's suffrage movement of the 1800s. She became involved in the anti-slavery movement, but while doing so she encountered gender equality. She founded the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869 with lifelong friend Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Together they worked for women's suffrage for over 50 years. Anthony published The Revolution from 1868 to 1870, a weekly paper about the women's suffrage movement whose motto read, "Men their rights and nothing more, women their rights and nothing less." In 1872, she illegally voted in the presidential election and was arrested and tried unsuccessfully to fight the charges. She was fined $100 but never paid it. Anthony wrote the Susan B. Anthony Amendment in 1878, which later became the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote in 1920. She assisted in founding the National American Women's Suffrage Association in 1890, which focused on a national amendment to secure women in the right to vote. This association was an American women's rights organization formed as a unification of the National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association. It was the largest and most important suffrage organization in the United States and was a primary promoter of women's rights to vote. Anthony compiled and published The History of Women's Suffrage with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Matilda Joslyn Gage. She then founded the International Council of Women in 1888 and the International Women's Suffrage Council in 1904, which brought international attention to suffrage. Anthony died on March 13th in 1906, but women still didn't have the right to vote. They didn't gain this right until 1920. The U.S. Treasury Department put Anthony's portrait on $1 coins in 1979, making her the first woman to be honored in this way. Susan B. Anthony touched the lives of many throughout the U.S. with her inspiring speeches about women's rights, leading the only nonviolent revolution in United States history.
Elizabeth Blackwell was born on February 3, 1821, near Bristol, England, and moved to the U.S. at age 11. After several rejections from medical school, she was finally accepted to Geneva Medical College in upstate New York. In 1849, she was the first woman to graduate from a medical school in the United States and was treated poorly because many believed that medicine was a totally unsuitable career for a woman. After her graduation, she was banned from practicing in most hospitals. Because of this, she moved to Paris, France, and kept training in La Maternite. She later opened a clinic known as the New York Dispensary for Poor Women and Children in 1853. With help from her sister, Emily Blackwell, Elizabeth established the New York Infirmary for Indigent Women and Children in 1857. During the period of the Civil War, Elizabeth trained many women in nursing, which became a great help to the Union Army. Also during the Civil War, Elizabeth, along with 3,000 other women, formed an association called the Women's Central Association for Relief, or WCAR. This organization contributed to the war effort by providing food, medical supplies, and clothing to the soldiers. Unlike many other people at the time, Elizabeth believed that maintaining sanitary conditions was an important aspect of health. Because of these beliefs, she helped establish the U.S. Sanitary Commission in 1861. In the late 1860s, she created a medical school for women. Students of this school, called the Women's Medical College of the New York Infirmary, learned about hygiene, among other things. After establishing the college, she then returned to England and set up a private practice in London and served as a lecturer at the London School of Medicine for Women. In the same year, she became the first woman listed on the British Medical Register. In 1871, Elizabeth published a book called The Religion of Health. Some of the best-selling medical books were written by Elizabeth Blackwell during the period of 1878 to 1902. She also wrote an autobiography called Pioneer Work in Opening the Medical Profession to Women. Some of her popular books included Counsel to Parents on the Moral Education of Their Children and The Human Element in Sex. Elizabeth retired in 1877 and died in her home in Hastings on May 31st, 1910.
Lizzie Borden was born on July 19, 1860 in Fall River, Massachusetts. When Lizzie was 2, her mother passed away. From then on, her older sister Emma vowed to take care of Lizzie, and she became the mother figure in Lizzie's life. Lizzie remained close to her father, Andrew Borden. Andrew eventually married Abby Durfee Gray. Andrew had amassed a small fortune over the years, but the Bordens continued to live a lifestyle well below the much more comfortable life that they could have lived. This always annoyed Lizzie, for her greatest desire was to live a lavish lifestyle of a young, beautiful, and rich woman, and maybe even move on to the hill, which was where the well-to-do lived in Fall River. But Lizzie's father refused to let her have a social life, with the exception of working actively with her church. The tension in the Borden house was rising because of Lizzie's frustration at her father's limitations and the strain between both the Borden sisters and Abby Borden. This tension is thought to have eventually led to one of the most famous murders in American history. On August 4th, 1892, one of the most well-known murders in American history was committed. Abby Borden was dusting the house and she went upstairs to tidy the guest rooms. She was later discovered there lying face down with numerous slashes to her back. They appeared to be some from one object that resembled an axe. Downstairs, Andrew Borden was discovered soon before the discovery of his wife. It appeared that he had been murdered on the living room sofa while he was taking a nap. By comparing how much the blood had clotted in each victim, it was clear that Abby Borden had been killed around an hour and a half to 2 hours before her husband. The only people who had been home during the time of Abby's death were Lizzie and the hired help, Bridget Sullivan. But Bridget had an alibi. She had been taking a nap in her room because she had felt ill. Besides, Bridget had no reason to murder her employers. Lizzie, on the other hand, did have motivation for murdering her parents. She said that she had been downstairs at the time of the stepmother's murder and that she had not heard anything peculiar from upstairs. She also claimed to have been in the barn during her father's murder. But when police investigated the barn, they saw that it was very dusty and anyone who would have entered it would have left footprints. But the only footprints in the barn were their own. Also, the barn was incredibly hot, and common sense told them that one person would stay there for more than a few minutes. However, it should be noted that when Lizzie said this, she had been given some drugs by the police to help calm her nerves, and they could have clouded her thinking slightly. The police also found a hatchet in the Borden's home that looked like it would have fit the marks of the wounds. It had also been attempted to be cleaned by someone recently with white ash. Lizzie also had been burning a dress with a brown stain on it. She claimed that it was paint, but coincidentally, brown is the color of dried blood. Emma Borden had an alibi, and did John Morse, a guest of the Borden house at the time of the murders. Although Andrew Borden was known to have many enemies, the police were doubtful that the murders were an outside job, because the murderers would have had to hide in the Borden home for almost 2 hours. Lizzie Borden was arrested for the murders of her father and stepmother. She hired the best defense that money could buy, and she pled not guilty. The jury was made up of Caucasian men. It was hard for the prejudiced men to believe that this Sunday school teacher, and more importantly a woman, could commit a murder in such a violent fashion. The jury deliberated for 1 hour, and Lizzie Borden was acquitted. Soon after her acquittal, Lizzie moved to the Hill with her sister, using her dead father's small fortune, living the life she had always dreamed of. However, the locals of Fall River ostracized Lizzie for the rest of her life.
Edith Wharton was born in New York City on January 24th, 1862. She was born into a very wealthy family that lived in New York and summered in Newport, Rhode Island. She was the first woman to receive the Pulitzer Prize in 1921 for her novel The Age of Innocence. Wharton received an honorary degree from Yale in 1923. She did not publish her first fictional book until she was 36 years old. In her lifetime, Edith published more than 40 books. Wharton spent some time every year in Italy and France, where she was inspired to write about art, architecture, and gardens. In 1885, she married Edward Robbins Wharton, and it was an unhappy marriage, which led to their divorce in 1913. During World War I, she became very dedicated to the Allied cause. Wharton led the committee to aid refugees from northeastern France and Belgium and created hostels and schools for them. She also traveled to the front lines to observe their fighting and wrote reports for the publication in America and urged the U.S. to join the war effort. She depicted the social and material world in her writing. Lastly, she helped establish workrooms to employ women who had no means of support and raised funds for these projects before she died on August 11th, 1937.
Marie Curie was born in Warsaw, Poland on November 7, 1867. As a child, Marie received a general education from local schools and some scientific training from her father. In 1891, she went to Paris and continued her studies at the Sorbonne. There she obtained licensehips in physics and the mathematical sciences. In 1894, she met Pierre Curie, a professor at the School of Physics, and they were married the following year. Marie and Pierre started working together on their exploration of radioactivity. Working with the mineral pitchblende, the pair discovered a new radioactive element in 1898. They named the element polonium, after Marie's native country of Poland. They also detected the presence of another radioactive material in the pitch blende and called that radium. In 1902, the Curies announced that they had produced a decigram of pure radium, demonstrating its existence as a unique chemical element. Together with her husband, she was awarded half of the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1903 for their study into the spontaneous radiation discovered by Blackwell, who was awarded the other half of the prize. With their Nobel Prize win, the Curies developed an international reputation for their scientific efforts, and they used their prize money to continue their research. Marie then became the head of physics after her husband, and in 1906, after his death, she became the professor of general physics in the Faculty of Sciences. This is the first time a woman held this position. In 1911, she won her second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry. Marie was selected for her discovery of radium and polonium, and became the first scientist to win 2 Nobel Prizes. When World War I broke out in 1914, Curie devoted her time and resources to helping the cause. She championed the use of portable X-ray machines in the field, and these machines earned the nickname Little Curies. In 1921, President Harding of the United States, on behalf of the women of America, presented her with 1 gram of radium in recognition of her service to science. Marie died on July 4, 1934, of aplastic anemia, which, ironically, is a disease that is caused by prolonged exposure to radium.